Yeah.
You have to do a bunch of really fast photos.
Okay.
All right. Well, so I'm Stephanie Spencer, and I know a lot of you, but some of you are new faces, so welcome. But so I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I have been an RN for, I did the math, it's 27 years, and I worked mostly in cardiology. I used to direct an outpatient heart failure clinic for 17 years, and I've done kind of like all sorts of different treatment modalities and management of end-stage heart failure patients, bridging them to artificial hearts and heart transplants. And so earlier this year, I was kind of ready for a change and started a microgreens business, and I've been selling to a bunch of restaurants. I sell at Hillcrest Farmers Market, and anyway, and then so I kind of, so I'll tell you real quick, but I'm going to give you more details as we get into this. But so just going along with life, and my husband had an issue where he got diagnosed with prediabetes. And to make a long story short, right here, that's when we converted to a whole foods plant-based diet. And one thing led to another, and I ended up getting my certification in plant-based nutrition through the Colin Campbell Center for Nutritional Studies out of Cornell University. So I just finished that. And so anyway, what I'm doing is I'm presenting to y'all like a whole bunch of new information. I've done a couple other presentations. I've, like in the last 20 years, I do presentations all the time, mainly on how to manage your heart failure or how to quickly get your patient to an advanced therapy consult before they crash and burn. But I really like doing how to prevent all this from happening in the first place so much better. So anyway, I've learned a whole lot. So anyway, we're just going to get into it, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our story along the way. So we know that in America, about 75 to 80% of all of our healthcare costs go to the treatment of chronic disease. And that's what I did for 20 years, was chronic disease management. And when we talk about chronic disease, we're mainly talking about diseases that are caused by our diet. So the most popular ones are diabetes, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, heart attacks, heart failure, cancer, which leads to kidney failure, or the heart failure leads to kidney failure, all sorts of stuff. And we're at the point now where a third of U.S. adults have prediabetes and don't even know it. So this is costing our country a whole lot of money, and without a lot to show for it. We spend 18% of our gross domestic product on healthcare. Most other countries spend about half that amount, and we die about 2 to 3 years sooner than other industrialized countries. So why is that? That's a good question. But all of these diseases are caused by diet, and all of them are largely preventable. So why do we have so much chronic disease? Is it because we're just all fat and lazy in America? And like some medical providers are of that opinion that like no one's ever going to change their diet because people don't want to do what they want to do. And my pet peeve is calling patients non-compliant. I've seen that for my entire life. And in my opinion, that's not the case. A lot of people don't have the resources they need to follow the diet they need to, but there's a lot of people that are agonizingly trying to find what diet they're supposed to be, or what should we eat to be healthy, right? And the health and wellness industry is now valued at $4.2 trillion. There's no shortage of healthcare gurus or podcasts or books. Whenever you come down with something, you can look it up on Amazon, and there's going to be 10,000 Google searches. And people get disgusted because it seems like, this month we're telling you to do one thing, and then the next month, and the media really thrives on changing headlines. So I had this conversation with my son the other night. He's like, I heard on NPR or something about that meat is good for you. And I'm like, when you hear nutritional research on the radio, why do you think they ran that study? Like, who commissioned that? Where'd that study come from? He's like, I don't know. I guess concerned scientists. No. 70% of nutritional research is sponsored by industry. Okay? Like in cardiology, what we call the lipid hypothesis, like does food cause heart attacks, was pretty much settled in the 80s. And all the cholesterol, egg, all the research that's come out is just sponsored by industry since then. And so that's, when you have an industry-sponsored study, then you also have a publicist that goes with it and makes the rounds on all the talk shows. And this is a well thought out plan. So has the health industry made us healthier? About 1 in 6 Americans goes on a diet each year, but 70% of us are overweight, huh? So why is that? It just doesn't seem to be working. And so this is our standard American diet, and y'all are probably familiar with that. So the purple is processed food, okay, refined and processed foods. And, we, like probably people like us sitting in this room like, oh, Americans and their fast food. But we're not even talking just fast food, cheeseburgers and fries. We are talking oil is a processed food, okay? Anything that isn't a whole food is a processed food, okay? And we're gonna talk more about that. The orange there is meat and dairy, okay? And then that little sliver of green is fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds. But half of that green sliver that Americans eat is potato chips or French fries, okay? So that's your fruits and vegetables, right? So only about 5 to 6% of the typical American diet is whole foods, okay? And our bodies really require a lot of phytonutrients. Phyto just means plant. So chemicals that plants make and antioxidants for our bodies to really work the right way. So this becomes a big problem. But there are a whole bunch of cultures throughout the globe that don't have any of these standard American diseases that we have, all these chronic diseases. And well, it's starting to become more prevalent, but I'll say like 30 years ago, before we exported fast food to like Myanmar and every corner of the globe, about 60% of the globe had none of these problems. So what diet do you think they were on? Were they doing keto or South Beach? Jenny Craig, you think? Or became industrialized, and still many areas of like rural China and rural Africa simply live on a plant-based diet, okay? Now plant-based diet means that they eat mostly starch, and it varies from country to country. In like northern Mexico, they live on corn. In Okinawa, it's mostly sweet potatoes. In Japan, it's mostly rice. It's like an 80% carbohydrate diet, okay? And they're not fat, are they? No. And they live a long time, and they don't have any of these diseases. So anyway, this reminds me, back what I used to do, my job was to keep heart failure patients out of the hospital. And if I could keep them out for 30 days, I thought I was a rock star. These are really sick folks. And I found over time that the most important thing that I could do to keep them out of the hospital, like with a heart failure patient, your heart's not squeezing strong enough. And so the blood kind of backs up, has to wait in line to go through the heart. So they eat too much salt, water follows salt, and they'll just fill up with fluid. And when you can't breathe, everyone goes to the ER. And so like in my clinic, we give them Lasix and chase it with potassium and blah, blah, blah. It's just a big mess. And, but I found that the best thing I could do to keep them out of the ER was to get them to lower their sodium intake. And so we really tried to get folks to just eat less of a processed diet. Like I wasn't trying to get anyone to be plant-based, but just to like set down your sausage biscuits, and like that was my nemesis. But anyway, and like of course there's no reimbursement to do any dietary teaching for anything other than end-stage renal disease in the medical field for some reason. And so I had so many people who need dietary teaching, and I didn't have time, So I had these videos of myself, like explaining what I want them to do, and I have these handouts. I make these little booklets, Stephanie's low sodium starter kit with all these little recipes and stuff. And so one day I had this patient, this is like the first time anyone ever asked me that. He's like, you keep telling me all this stuff, what I shouldn't eat, but what should I eat? And I'm like, that's the whole problem now, isn't it? I mean, and we don't even have a consensus on what you should eat, you know? And yeah, I'm like, well, you know what? Let's start by never eat anything they serve in this hospital. Don't eat anything in the cafeteria. Don't eat anything we bring here. Don't eat anything in the little vending machines. None of that. You know, like, I don't even know where to start to tell you what you should eat, because like nothing that anyone regular, not the Heart Healthy Diet, not the American Diabetic Association diet, none of those reverse disease. Okay, so this becomes a big problem in healthcare. That's what we call, well, so Michael Pollan wrote a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma, which is just that, like, what are we supposed to eat? Okay, like a koala bear wakes up in, I don't know, Australia, I guess, every day, and they don't have to look at like Time magazine and see what's on the front cover as to what they should eat. They don't agonize, they just wake up and they eat eucalyptus leaves, and they're healthy, and they thrive, and they don't worry about it, okay? So the question for us is, what the heck are we supposed to eat? And then the bigger question is, are we even omnivores? And we're going to talk more about that later, because that's kind of the big dilemma. And anyway, and I learned a whole lot more that really changed my worldview from this certification class that I did. But anyway, so we're going to talk about three main disease processes: diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, okay? And so what we're trying to find out here is there a connection between diabetes and our food supply, okay? So back in 1994, dark blue here is 6%. 6% of the population of Louisiana and Mississippi had diabetes. So this is like 2 years before me and Paul got married. I can't believe, like, I can remember that far back, to a time when Mississippi had a 6% diabetes rate. But over time, it just starts picking up. Oh, there's Illinois for some reason now. The whole country's getting dark blue, spread through the whole country. 6%, 2002. Well, what's going to happen to Mississippi if everyone turns dark blue? We gotta be number one. So now we gotta have a new color. Now we're up to 10%. Okay. So the dark red is now a lot of the country is at 10%, and 10% spreads across the United States. Okay, so obesity prevalence mirrors diabetes prevalence also, but like just in the last 25 years, diabetes has skyrocketed. We're not even talking the last 100 years, we're talking the last 25 years since me and Paul have been married. Isn't that long? Right? So what's going on here? Is there a connection? Well, let's look at this. So this is our per capita meat intake over the last 100 years, okay? So in 1909, the average American ate 123 pounds of meat a year. And, you know, like 100 years ago, you probably had to do a little bit more work to get meat than we did. It was probably a little bit more expensive than it is now because they didn't have an industrialized factory farming system. And like if you had to slaughter all the meat you were eating yourself, you'd probably, you know, like think twice about it maybe. But yeah, then up to 2012, well, it looks like it peaked in 2004 at 201 pounds. And I looked up the statistics for like 2018, and we were up to, I think it was like 200 pounds. Of course, my speaker notes have vanished here. 210 pounds per capita in 2018, okay? So our meat consumption has gone up, red meat, poultry, and fish. Chicken sure has gotten popular, isn't it? Chicken's the most popular meat in the United States. We eat 1 million chickens per hour here, okay? So yeah, went from 10 pounds a year up to, peaked at 61 in 2006. So has switching to chicken, has putting chicken on all of our healthy salads dropped the diabetes incident or the heart attack incident? Yeah, it hasn't made a bit of change. Red meat is about 33% fat. Chicken is about 23% fat, okay? But it's still loaded with saturated fat, and it's loaded with other stuff that's not friendly to our heart, which we'll talk about later. So there's not a lot of difference in what kind of meat you eat. And we're going to talk about that later, because it's not even just the fat that causes heart disease. And this is actually the big topic of conversation at the American College of Cardiology meeting conference this year. So discovering that there's more than just fat that damages our arteries. Okay, but here is the number one, what I think is really the biggest link in increase in diabetes, and that's the increase in our cheese consumption, okay? So 100 years ago, we ate 3.8 pounds of cheese per year, okay? And you know, like when you go to Kroger's and you get that big old block, that's a pound of cheese, okay? Only 3 of those a year. And in America, you know, like the French eat cheese. Like 100 years ago, America was a lot more homogenous and didn't really have a cheese eating tradition so much. And anyway, so you can see, it's funny because I was asking my parents, like when you were young, and like, did you go out to eat? Were there restaurants? And Dad's like, oh, there was like a diner, I don't know. And like my dad went to college in 1957, and he's like, the first time I ever saw pizza was when I went to college, like in Berkeley, California. Like no place else even had pizza, you know, like you just had your meatloaf and peas or whatever. But so this is really interesting. You can see, look around 1980 on the cheese graph there. It just goes into the stratosphere, right? So in the 80s, what was the big diet fad in the 80s? Y'all remember? What did we do?
Cheese nachos.
Okay, no. Atkins was like late 90s. In the 70s and 80s, it was all low fat. Okay, remember Snackwell cookies, low fat milk. Cheese dip, is that what you said? Well, yeah. Well, so you're going to see more about this. So, anyway, like Ansel Keys was this researcher back around World War II. He invented the K ration, and he made the connection after World War II that a lot of Americans were dying of heart disease, and like this, he noticed this wasn't happening in the Mediterranean countries, and that's kind of where we got the Mediterranean diet from. So Ansel Keys, this research comes back, and this is Senator George McGovern up here. And Senator George McGovern sat on the U.S. Senate Select Committee for Diet and Nutrition, and Dr. T. Colin Campbell was on that committee with him. Dr. Campbell is the one that wrote the China study, and that's who directly taught the nutrition class that I just took, okay? So he's one of the foremost nutrition researchers in the country. And so anyway, they presented their evidence to Senator McGovern about the connection between our meat and dairy intake and the huge rise in heart attacks. 1958 was the highest rate of heart attacks in the United States, or heart attack deaths in the United States. And then we invented bypass surgery and stents, and we brought the immediate death rate down. So now you die 8 to 10 years later after your heart attack instead of immediately. But anyway, so so Senator McGovern, in his naivete, just said, looks like Americans need to stop eating as much meat and dairy. Cut down on meat and dairy. And he's the last politician that ever said to cut down on a specific food group. Okay, so he got tons of flack from the meat producers and the dairy producers, and was basically run out of town on a rail. Okay, so after that, people learned to never point out a specific food group, and so we talk in nutrition gobbledygook, which is like, so then the recommendation morphed to eat less saturated fat, okay? And like regular people, like, what does that mean, you know? And so, yeah, eat less saturated fat. So that's what brought about kind of like the low fat craze that started like into the 70s and then in the 80s. So that's like, think back, any of you that are old enough, like in the 40s and the 50s, did you have low fat milk in the 60s? No, it didn't exist. So it starts up like in the 70s, like we always had skim milk because we were healthy in my house, right? And I mean, when I was a kid. And so that's where the low fat milk came in the 80s, 70s and 80s. That's right when that cheese spike goes up. This is cheese consumption. So how did that happen? Well, it seems that dairy producers were like, shoot, we got all this extra milk fat. What are we going to do with it? I'm just going to march down to my friendly USDA office and point out that I've got this stockpile of fat that we need to get rid of. And the USDA, being very helpful, decided to launch a little marketing program. So do y'all remember what was the big food fad of the late 70s into the early 80s? It had to do with sterno and little spears. Fondue. So did fondue just spontaneously arise as a fad? No. This was a program from the USDA to promote cheese. All right? And so we're all like, I mean, we've got a fondue pot. My parents had one. Anyone here have fondue? Sure, yeah. So we slowly started eating more cheese. And the USDA also has a program called, it's called the Checkoff Program, through which they promote dairy and cheese, because we can't have all this cheese stacking up from the low-fat milk we're drinking. So you're going to drink your low-fat milk, and then you're going to be trained to eat more cheese so that the production can remain stable, okay? So anyway, that's a good time. But yeah, so you can see as all these rates shoot up, so does our diabetes rate, okay? So now, type 2 diabetes, there's two kinds of diabetes. Type 1 is kind of like childhood diabetes, which means your pancreas does not secrete insulin. Your beta cells just don't work in the pancreas, and they have to take insulin. Type 2 diabetes is what we always used to call adult onset diabetes. And that happens because we become insulin resistant, okay? But now we're seeing 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds with type 2 adult onset diabetes. And how is this happening? I mean, we know obesity is increasing, but anyway, there's a doctor called Dr. Neil Bernard, and he did some research on diabetes in 2005, and how this has not just rocked the whole medical world, I don't know, but many doctors still don't know about this. So what he found out, the way we always explain like type 2 diabetes to like our patients, and this still holds true, it's all about insulin resistance. For some reason, you're just not utilizing insulin correctly, okay? So these are our muscle cells, and what insulin does is it acts as, when we eat food, the food is turned into glucose in our bodies, right? So we've got glucose running through our bloodstream, sugar, okay? And we need to get that glucose into the cell, from the bloodstream into the cell. And the insulin, we always would describe, acts as a key to open the lock and get the glucose. It drives the glucose into the cell, and that's what we do everything. That's how we use all of our bodily processes. We run on glucose, okay? The problem with insulin resistance is that for some reason, that insulin and the glucose is not making it into the cell. So the glucose is building up in the bloodstream, and your insulin levels are building up in the bloodstream, okay? So Dr. Neil Bernard did some research, and he found through this technique called MR spectroscopy, you know, like MRIs, it's MR spectroscopy basically means they can look at the cell on the cellular level into the cell wall. And what they found is that on type 2 diabetics, they had a buildup of fat on their cell walls. And the fat was, it's more complicated than this, but this is the easiest way to explain it. The fat was basically clogging up those locks so that the insulin was trying to open up the keyhole and let the glucose in, but it can't because it's clogged up, okay? So once they understood that mechanism, Dr. Bernard wanted to conduct a study with two groups of patients, trying one group on a plant-based, no oil diet to see if he could change insulin resistance. Because, I mean, I've been a nurse for 30 years. I've never seen anyone's diabetes just go away. You know, like, you never, take your metformin and your diabetes gets better. And I think a lot of patients think that, like, oh, I got my statin now, I've got my metformin, that's gonna fix this, right? No, I'm like, and your doctor knows this is never gonna go away, right? So he did a study and had two groups of patients. The blue group at the top, the blue line is his group with the plant-based, no oil, basically a vegan diet. The red line is the standard American Diabetic Association diet. And standard ADA diet is like limit your carbs, never eat, you can only eat a half an apple at lunch, you're just always trying to keep your carbohydrate load steady, okay? But on the vegan diet, they could eat whatever they wanted. Just no animal protein, no meat, no dairy, no eggs, and no oil, okay? And after 22 weeks, these numbers here, this is a measurement of hemoglobin A1C, which is a measurement of long-term diabetes, basically. And normal is 5.7 or below. We consider a diabetic to be in a controlled range if their A1C is below 7, okay? Like you won't have complications. But so anyway, you can see on the ADA group, they only went down like 0.3 of a point. Like, they're just tightening up on their ADA diet. But on the vegan diet, they went from 8 down to 6.8. Like they had a 3-fold increase in the amount of blood sugar drop. And actually, a lot of these patients went on further on down the line to reverse their diabetes and drop down into like the 5-point range. They don't show it on here because for the purposes of this study, they had to only show patients that didn't have a change in their medication. Because if your sugar drops low enough, you have to take them off of their diabetic medication, and then we have 2 variables, and then it skews the results. So that's why it stops right there. But yeah, and so like he went on to write a book about how to reverse diabetes, and he says like many patients, like if your hemoglobin A1C is around 9 or 10, usually within like 6 months you'll have a 4-point drop. 7 to 8, if you're 7 to 8, like within that amount of time you'll have at least a 1 or 2-point drop. So it very predictably tends to drop type 2 diabetics down into the normal range. And that's because that fat is just melting out of their cells, you see? And then the insulin can drive the glucose into the cell, and so they regain their insulin sensitivity. And then they become carbohydrate tolerant again, okay? The way we treat type 2 diabetics now is we assume you will always be insulin resistant and carbohydrate intolerant. So we adapt to your carbohydrate intolerance instead of curing your carbohydrate intolerance, okay? Does that make sense? So, so that was a pretty huge thing. This is the Adventist study. Seventh-day Adventists are a group that really focuses on health as part of their religion. And a lot of them are vegetarian or vegan. I mean, there's kind of different ranges, but researchers love doing studies on them. And they're the one group in the United States as part of the blue zones that lives a lot longer than everyone else because they are plant-based, basically. So what they found is, like, of the Adventists, they separated them into different groups and compared their decreased risk of diabetes compared to a standard American diet. So if they were semi-vegetarian, they eat a little bit of meat, you have a 28% decreased risk of diabetes. Pescatarian, if you only eat fish, drops down to 51% decreased risk. Complete vegetarian, no meat or fish, but you're eating eggs and dairy, a 61% decreased risk. And vegan, no meat or dairy at all, 78% decreased risk. So there's a striking correlation between a plant-based diet and not having type 2 diabetes, okay? So I'm going to tell you a little story here, but yeah, this is how this is how I ended up standing before you today. Is that so Paul back there ended up, Paul's just a regular guy that doesn't ever go to the doctor, and he came home one day, and you get older, you get these little complaints. But anyway, he had these little tumors, like little bumps on his arms, legs, and in his belly. And like he kind of had them, he'd go to them, and they're like, oh, it's a fatty tumor, it's a lipoma, it's no big deal. And like, people get these. And then one day Paul was like, these are just all over my stomach. Like, I can feel like my belly feels full. I can't stand it anymore. I'm gonna go to the doctor. I'm like, whoa, go to the doctor, okay. So I made him get all his blood work and get a lipid panel and all that. So he gets a call from the doctor a couple days later, and this is what Paul translated to me that the doctor said. He said something about my hemoglobin, but it's not too bad, and everything else was great. And I'm like, really? Hemoglobin, I know exactly what hemoglobin this is, and this has nothing to do with your blood count. And so I made him march over there and get the papers in my hand, okay? And sure enough, his hemoglobin A1C was in the beginning of the pre-diabetic range. But like what Paul got from his doctor is like, oh, it's not too bad. Like, I've seen way worse diabetics than this. But Paul's like, but I used to not be diabetic, you know? Like, so as soon as I saw that he was pre-diabetic, I had seen Forks Over Knives like years ago, and I knew you could reverse diabetes with a plant-based diet. And actually, and What the Health, if you have diabetes, is another really good documentary that explains the connection between, you know, plant-based diet and reversing diabetes. But anyway, so like after I got that lab paper, we never ate another bit of meat again. I mean, like, that was it. And I thought Paul might fight me a little bit, that I sat him down and showed him What the Health, and he got like maybe not even halfway through it, and he's like, I don't want to see anymore. I'll just do whatever you say. And so we went plant-based, but the whole point I'm trying to show you in this picture here is, like, with my background, I know how much one can get away with and one cannot get away with, okay? And as soon as you get to that level where you're pre-diabetic, or your doctor's saying, like, it's time for you to start blood pressure medication, or it's time to go on a statin, like, you are at the bifurcation of these two roads here. And that's, which way is this going to end up? This is going to determine the last 30 years of your life at our age, okay? I mean, you know, are you going to be healthy, or are you going to have one thing lead to another thing, and then we're getting hyperbaric treatments because we're getting a toe cut off, and then 6 weeks of vancomycin therapy because we got septic. This is what I do for a living. And so I was like, I don't care if the reversal is to eat dirt, we're going to do it. And so we did, and guess what? It's not even that hard. And we both lost 20 pounds, and within 4 months, we repeated his blood work, and his diabetes was reversed. So, and it's a lot easier if you like start right when you get your first chronic disease. So, yeah. But anyway, so it was a good time, and now I've got 3 teenage boys that live in a vegan house, and I only get a lot of pushback from one now, so I've got 2 out of 3 that are semi-on board. I didn't really give them an option at that point. Okay, so now we're going to talk about coronary artery disease, okay? So this is our second big thing, and we usually start with diabetes. Not everyone with coronary artery disease has diabetes, but diabetes will frequently lead right to your heart attack and all sorts of things, because diabetes tends to cause a lot of damage to all the arteries in our whole body, okay? And so, like, that's why I was so freaked out with Paul being pre-diabetic, that I was like, we're just not going to go that way. So anyway, you can see in that top picture there, the normal artery, okay? There's that little pink ring on the inside, and that's the lining of the artery, and we call it the endothelium, okay? And it's really important that we have a healthy endothelium, all right? But over time, I'm going to show you this really cool picture. When we eat meat, all right, when you draw blood, blood separates into all the cells, go to the bottom, and this yellow stuff at the top is called serum, okay? Meat eaters will tend to have cloudy serum because it's cloudy with saturated fat, okay? Fish, chicken, your healthy chicken salad is making your blood look like that for about 5 hours after you eat it, okay? And then it clears in 5 hours, just in time for lunch or just in time for dinner. So we're keeping like a nice cloudy flow of fat. And like, I've seen that, like when they do like bypass surgery or they do heart casts, cardiologists call it gumbo. They'll be doing that guide wire and they pull it out and you just got this chicken fat coming out of the arteries. So that's what it clogs up with. But on the left, if you eat beans, your serum's going to be clear. Avocados is going to be clear. Even fake meat, which is not ideal, it's made out of like some kind of soy thing, it'll be clear, okay? So the result of that cloudy blood with the cloudy fat going over your arteries your entire life starts to cause some problems, okay? So is it just like maybe 20% of our population that's going to have a problem with this? No. So they've done studies, and this kind of shows you the progression of heart disease. They did studies on children that like died tragically for some reason, and it was actually a bunch of 10-year-olds that on autopsy they found, this was in the 90s, they did this, see down here at the bottom, they found that the 10-year-olds were starting to have fatty streak formation on their aorta, which is the big artery that comes off our heart. You know, like imagine like a pipe running and there's some dirt, and pretty soon you'll have a line of dirt down the center of the pipe where the, you know, like where the mud was running down or something. That's what happens with a fatty streak. So was it like half the 10-year-olds had fatty streaks? The other half didn't? No. 100% of the 10-year-olds had fatty streaks on their aorta, okay? And they've done other studies in the Vietnam War and the Korean War that on autopsies of soldiers who are, what, 18 to 24 maybe, and their arteries looked about like, see where it says stable plaque, that second one in the middle there, second from the end, they had plaque buildup. And when they did autopsies of the Korean and Vietnamese soldiers, they didn't have that because they are on a plant-based diet, okay? So about 80% of GIs had this serious plaque buildup at age 18 to 20, okay? And so, that, you know, like you can see, like we're already not giving ourselves much slack, and then like by the time we get to be 60, 70, like we just have a little bit of room left for the blood to run through, okay? And that's what causes a lot of our problems. So now we're going to talk about how cholesterol affects our endothelium. That's that healthy, it's like what we call the life jacket of the artery, okay? And so it's not just a sheer, like, it's not just a pure mechanical blockage that causes a lot of heart attacks. It's an irritated artery wall, okay? And so what happens, and I don't think my pointer works, but see that little green spot up there? That's an LDL particle, low density lipoprotein. It's like a cholesterol particle, okay? So, you know, all that cloudy serum that's running over your arteries day after day, what happens is it goes through there, and the LDLs don't just roll on by, and like maybe you rub on them, they burrow into the artery, into the artery wall, the endothelium. And they go, and underneath here, like where all this stuff is, that's called the subendothelium, underneath the endothelium. So they go on into there and they become oxidized. Oxidized means they lose an electron, and they, you know, like oxidation is like rust. You see a rusty car, that's an oxidized piece of steel. But so that happens in the endothelium. This is all oxidized and inflamed, okay? These blue things, those are the white blood cells. So the job of our white blood cells is like, oh, we got some inflammation, something's going on here, I'm going to come help, okay? Like when you scrape your knee, and then you get like a scab, and then it starts kind of oozing yellow stuff. That is the white blood cells cleaning that out, and then they just kind of like spit out the back all the debris, and that's, you know, on your scab. But so here's the white blood cells going into the subendothelium and trying to clean that up. And they're like, I'm trying to help out. I'm trying to eat up all this oxidized LDL. But then they get basically just full of oxidized LDL. And this thing on the right here is called a foam cell, which is basically, you think of it as like Jabba the Hutt. Actually, Dr. Esselstyn describes it as like Darth Vader for your cells. Foam cells are really bad. Foam cells really irritate your vein. They cause a lot of damage to the endothelium, okay? So because of this process, every time we get all that fat, right, our artery wall gets irritated. And the problem with like these foam cells and stuff is it makes your blood cells that are running through there all the time. We want a healthy endothelium, the blood will just slide along like against Teflon, okay? But when our endothelium gets all inflamed, the blood is rubbing up against it like Velcro or like sandpaper, okay? So it's scratchy and irritated, all right? So this is clearly a healthy artery and not healthy artery. So on the left, that's a wide open artery. You see that little red line, that tiny red line on the inside, that's the endothelium, the dark red, okay? This is an artery that is clearly like just about to close up, okay? And so, you know, like you're looking at that, you're like, oh, that's probably how heart attacks. Increased mortality rate, higher death rate than a normal diet. So, and you're gonna see more here, but like eating tons of meat, that level of protein is dangerous.
I know that.
Yeah. And, but anyone that loses weight by whatever means.
I think it's wonderful.
Right, yeah. But the thing is, there haven't really been long-term studies on the effects of keto diets, because it's like just like, so are there a lot of people that have lived 50? Do you live longer than usual? No. I mean, what they found is that they have higher death rates than you know, like average diets. So yeah, in general, that is not a good idea, the keto diet. Okay, so now I'm going to show you here. So this is a follow-up study on Esselstyn's diet, and so he did his first study was like 18 patients. Then they were like, well, we need to do a study where we compare your little diet, because that diet was not popular with anyone in the cardiology community. So they wanted to compare it to a bunch of other trials, okay? And so TTC over there on the left, that's Esselstyn's with Treat the Cause, okay? And that's his hardcore plant-based, no oil diet, all right? This is the percentage of major cardiac events after the diet. I think it was like within 4 years after the diet, okay, they followed him. And we're comparing to these other things. So the Lyon trial there on the far right, that's the Mediterranean diet. So the Mediterranean diet does show some improvements in cardiac markers, but 25% of those patients had a major cardiac event, stroke, heart attack, or death within 4 years, okay? I don't think that's great. These other one, like the Courage trial, was optimized medical management and stents or something. I'm not sure what the natural history was, but Esselstyn's had a 0.6% rate. So of 177 people, I think one person had some kind of event, okay? That is rare that you ever see any study where like hardly anyone had a single problem, okay? This is a 40-fold improvement compared to the other ones, okay? So that's just about pretty much treating and reversing heart disease, okay, with a plant-based diet. Yeah, oh, and one other thing I'm gonna talk to you about. So when we talk about coronary circulation, I just want you to visualize this, and we were talking about like those big arteries. These are the arteries that we stent, the left, you know, anterior descending, that's the most common one, and like if you have a consultation with the cardiologist, they'll show you that little picture and show you where they put the stents in. But we got to remember that these arteries on the heart, they don't just lay there. They go all through the heart. And I found this really cool slide. Look at that. That's just all the arteries, right? And it looks like the roots of a plant, right? So we have arteries that go all the way through the heart muscle, okay? And then they go down to these little arterioles, little capillaries, you know. And so sometimes we'll have patients that have what we call microvascular disease, and because they've probably already been stented in their major arteries, and they'll come back with chest pain, they go to the cath lab, and the doctor will be like, there's nothing I can do because it's microvascular. And then we get these patients that are ramped up on meds like called nitrates, like Endure and stuff, and they still have chest pain no matter what, because they have this microvascular and those tiny little arteries blockage, okay? Esselstyn found that on his diet, sometimes in as little as 3 weeks, patients that had like this chronic chest heaviness from walking, that would just start to clear up because it's that microvascular occlusion. So just remember this, like whenever you're thinking like, should I eat this deep fried, like texturized vegetable protein? It's vegan, you know? Like if you're converting over, you'll go through your it's vegan phase with like Oreos and stuff. But just remember all that stuff with that. Like that's what I always think when I'm like, should I eat this? Think of all these little arteries that you want to clear out. If you haven't been vegan for 20 years, we all have. blockage in our arteries. That would be ideal if we could make it go away, okay? The only way to get it to go away. Oh, and another thing Esselstyn says is that you have to get your LDL to melt a plaque, to get the plaque to start to reverse. Like a normal LDL is like below 100, but what he says, what we want people to be at is between 70 and 80. We consider that like kind of heart attack proof. But Esselstyn found that he wanted his people below 58 on their LDL to make a plaque reverse. Okay, that's crazy low. So that's why you have to really cut out the oil. Okay. Okay, so here is one more. Yes, sir.
So you hear a lot of good things. What about healthy oil? Like these like all oils? Like you hear a lot of
Okay,
good
so
about avocado.
right, in general, and I'm glad you asked this. This is the question that always comes up. So that's why it's important to look at like what is your condition. For diabetes, we want no oils because we're trying to melt the fat out of the cells. Heart disease, no oil. Okay. Oil is a processed food because it's separated from fiber. Okay. So an avocado is a whole food. An olive is a whole food. But when we squeeze the olive or squeeze the avocado and get the oil out, oil is a processed food. Okay. And yes, you have heard lots that olive oil is healthy. Okay. The consensus of the medical community is that it is not healthy, okay? And in fact, they've done these studies where people ingest olive oil, like a spoonful of olive oil, and then they'll check their like brachial artery responsiveness. And the problem with oil is that it damages the endothelium and kind of stuns it for a while. And so the reason we need a healthy endothelium is so our arteries can dilate. So if our arteries are really responsive and they dilate when we need them to, then we don't get high blood pressure, we don't get heart attacks, we don't have all these problems. The oil, they found, stuns your arteries, and they would do a test where they put a tourniquet on and inflate the blood pressure cuff and see, and they could tell that the arteries did not, when they let the blood pressure cuff go, the arteries didn't rebound like they should after you've gotten oil. Okay, so then, and it takes about 5 hours for that effect to clear out to where your arteries are responsive. Okay, so yeah, the consensus is oil is not good for you in really any form. Okay.
Not even the whole food, so for you.
Okay, so can you have the whole food? That's a good question. Okay, so if you don't have any coronary artery disease, nothing diagnosed, like Dr. Neil Bernard on the diabetic diet, he lets his people have an avocado, but not oil. Esselstyn does not let his people have an avocado, okay? But this is people with, like, if you've had a left hurt calf, like, you'll know it, then if we're trying to reverse plaque buildup, no avocado, no coconut. If you are in good health, yes, a whole food. In fact, really healthy vegans eat. I mean, like, and I kind of think, like, I don't know if I'll ever be at the point where I'm like, oh, just go nuts with. I mean, like, I feel like I just probably gonna have years of where I'm trying to reverse my arterial blockages. But in general, like, if you're very healthy, yes, avocados are fine, coconuts are fine. Yeah, those are. And there's also the misnomer of fats, like do you need fat to absorb vitamins? And you do, but all vegetables have fat in them. Okay, corn has fat. Where do you think we get corn oil from, right? So like, you don't need this extra fat. Now, I will not deny that it has lots of culinary benefits, and oil, like, some are like, oh, how am I gonna do this without oil? But in general, you want to try to use, like, knowing that oil is not good for you, try to use as little as possible, okay? So
Stephanie, you're trying to reverse your coronary artery or plaque buildup or whatever. Are you eating avocados at all? Or nuts?
Do I eat them personally? Well, I'll tell you. I have like a little bit of resistant cholesterol. Like when we went on a plant-based diet, Paul's total cholesterol dropped 40 points.
Yeah.
Mine dropped 3 points.
I'm purified.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But and I've actually found some information on this. There is like kind of a phenomenon of vegans having like higher cholesterol, and they tend to say like, you know, your liver makes cholesterol, and your liver may have its reasons to like keep your cholesterol higher for one reason or another. And basically they say like, you know, like don't worry about it if you have gone on a vegan diet. You know, it's more important if at that point, if you are vegan and you have a high cholesterol, to check inflammatory markers like a C-reactive protein. And your C-reactive protein is probably going to be okay. So if you're vegan, C-reactive protein's okay, but for whatever reason your liver wants to crank out more, because statins turn off your liver's ability to make cholesterol. Because we're like, you know, your liver makes cholesterol. We don't need any dietary cholesterol at all. But we've just assumed like you're just going to keep eating the dietary cholesterol. We'll shut down your liver's ability to make cholesterol, and then all your cholesterol will be dietary. So in the case of being a vegan, all your cholesterol is coming from your liver. And like once you kind of get into this mindset, then we're like, maybe we shouldn't second guess our body, you know? But my cholesterol is still a little bit, it's like 180 something, so I don't eat avocados.
You don't?
Yeah.
Or nuts either?
Not too often. I mean, like, I'm not gonna say never, but like that's the problem that we have, is we have to get in our head like, am I trying to get as much of this down as I can? Am I trying to, you know what I'm saying? Like, or do I want to limit it? And so I've decided with my cholesterol level, I'm just like, for now, I'm just gonna lay off of them. Except if I like, you know, it could really make a huge difference. I mean, I don't have any documented coronary artery disease, but you just kind of have to figure out where you fit in there. And so coconuts and avocados have saturated fat,
Right.
but it's plant fat, you know.
Things like Lipitor, other.
That's the whole
other
goal,
drugs.
right? And so what we want to do is make you not need statins. And yeah, usually, like they say, sometimes within 2 weeks, you'll get about a 30-point drop in your cholesterol. Yeah, so you can have a really rapid drop. So if you're on a statin and you want to go plant-based, like just do the plant-based diet, and then after maybe a few months, go to your doctor and redraw a lipid panel. And if it's super low, then they might like cut it in half or take you off. But the consensus, like in the cardiology community, and I have found, thanks to the internet, like plant-based cardiologists that have podcasts and stuff. But I don't really know if any doctors are like, burn it all, throw those pills away. You know, like once we can determine that your blood levels have come down, then we can back down on the pills.
I threw them away 2 years ago.
Oh, well, then, yeah,
Just
go on.
because of the pain that I was getting.
Right. And
I
a lot of-
started doing it.
Yeah, a lot of people have that. Muscle pain, and you know, statins strip like CoQ10 out of your cells, and yeah, I mean, like, and it's making your liver shut down. Like, you know, it's doing kind of a bunch of unnatural stuff. You know, it has benefit for someone that's not going to change their diet, okay? But you are better off to change your diet and not need these statins. Yeah. Okay, so here's my Stephanie ruins everything slide. Why can't we just take all the fat out of meat and dairy like we did in the 80s? Like if we have skim milk, or we could just magically take all the fat out of meat. Wouldn't that be better? Or we just go on a low fat diet, okay? Well, we have discovered there's this stuff called TMAO, which comes from animal protein, which is really bad. So all animal protein, fish, chicken, meat, eggs, egg whites, milk, everything, has either this substance called carnitine or choline, okay? The carnitine and choline in animal protein goes into your gut, and in the gut of a meat eater, there's bacteria that turns the carnitine or choline into trimethylamine, TMA, which then goes to your liver, gets oxidized, and turns into TMAO, which is all you gotta know is it's really bad, okay? TMAO inflames your blood vessels, it affects cholesterol metabolism, and leads to more atherosclerosis, okay? So that's why, like in the 80s, when we did everything low fat, just like the government told us to, cut the fat out, the saturated fat out, and you have your snack bowl cookies and your skim milk. That's why we didn't have this like resurgence in health, right? Because we're still getting all of the animal protein, okay? So that is why, oh, and I'm gonna tell you a story. So there's, believe it or not, Medicare now covers what's called an intensive cardiac rehab program for patients that have had stents or chest pain or bypass surgery that puts them through a program where they go through, you know, like 6 months of rehab with, you know, weights and exercise and stuff, and then also dietary teaching. And it's pretty strict. My dad went through, he had valve surgery and that qualified him for it. And, but they do allow, there's one program where they do allow, and this was Ornish's, Dr. Dean Ornish's original program this was based on, they allow low-fat milk and like low-fat yogurt and chicken, okay? But it's like really healthy with your chicken and low-fat yogurt, okay? And then we got Esseltyn's program, which is the hardcore, you know. And by the way, his program is leafy greens boiled with balsamic vinegar 6 times a day, like every day, because that's got the nitric oxide that repairs your endothelium. Okay, so that was part of his plan too, and no animal protein at all, and no oil. Okay, his group had an average 7% plaque regression. Okay, that means that the plaque went away by 7%, which doesn't sound like much. You know, we've talked about that calcified plaque and stuff. The 7%, because of the dilation, some mathematical law, it really is a 30% increase in blood flow, which is a huge difference for the individual as far as what they can do, okay? I'm talking about Esseltyn's, the hardcore one. We're gonna compare that to Ornish's rehab program, which allowed some low-fat dairy. He had an average of, straighten our head. So they've done, you know, scientists do lots of studies on animals too, and they found that, and especially in developing our lipid hypothesis, like is there a connection between cholesterol and heart disease? We found that with dogs, which are carnivores, you can feed a dog like up to 50 egg yolks a day, just tons of cholesterol, and a dog will not develop coronary artery disease because its liver is very efficient just shooting that cholesterol out, because dogs are carnivores. Same thing with like tigers, and like tigers have a 3-foot long intestine, it's just a straight shot. So they are very efficient, and they don't want the meat to, you know, their body just is gonna shoot that meat right out, and they are very healthy eating just meat, okay? Rabbits, they've done, I've looked through this, but like, you know, like all these trials on Lipitor and stuff, well, what are they doing these tests on? They're doing it on rabbits, because rabbits are very similar in their cholesterol metabolism to humans. 2 grams of cholesterol a day in a rabbit can just fill up its arteries with plaque, just like in humans. That's the same thing I observe all the time. So it seems that we kind of resemble the cholesterol metabolism of an herbivore more than a carnivore. So that was a big eye-opening breakthrough for me. And you've probably seen this guy before, right? So Bill Clinton, leader of the free world, he was out of office then, but he had his first heart attack and bypass surgery in 2004, okay? He had all the best surgeons. Whenever there's like a famous person that has their heart attack, like Boris Yeltsin or whatever, you know, like they always fly in the celebrity surgeons. They'll get like DeBakey from Baylor and everyone. And so I think the same thing happened with Clinton, and they all had their big press conference. And so yeah, they saved him. They did their bypass surgery, and then in 2010, 6 years later, he had another heart attack, and he had to have a stent. Okay. And the leader of the free world, or the ex-leader of the free world, had all the best doctors, right? All of this research has been available since like the 90s on heart disease reversal. And was he given advice? And I did. Dr. Campbell is the foremost authority on nutrition and health in this country. And the China study was based on the Chinese Cancer Atlas. There was a Chinese premier in the 70s that got cancer, and he commissioned a study, which ended up being the Chinese Cancer Atlas. And there were 850 million people that this Cancer Atlas was based on. So it's a very robust data. It is the strongest studies you can get. And then Colin Campbell built his study with the information of the Chinese Cancer Atlas. In the China study, everyone's Chinese. At the time, in the 90s, there was very little, like migration. And so like everyone is genetically the same. So we can eliminate that variable. So this is like, what effect does environment and nutrition have on cancer, okay? And prior to the China study, Colin Campbell's earlier studies, this gentleman, he came from a dairy farm and became a researcher, a nutrition researcher. He basically researched protein his entire life. And he started out in the Philippines trying to figure out what they could do to help malnourished children. And he was trying to find a more efficient way to get more milk to them, okay? To help them not be malnourished. And so he started doing studies on rats and casein. And casein is the protein found in milk. 87% of the milk protein is casein. And so he had two groups of rats. One group of rats was fed 20% casein, and the other group was fed 5% protein in the form of casein, okay? And these are 20% protein is a normal range of protein that pretty much all Americans eat, okay? What he found over time, like by 12 weeks, was that not a majority of the rats had cancer. In the 20% group, not 80%, 100% of the 20% casein rats had cancer, okay? Had liver cancer. Or the beginnings of liver foci, they call it. Of the 5% casein group, 0 rats had cancer, okay? And the reason this is such a huge deal is because sometimes people will do studies with like a crazy number of carcinogens or something that wouldn't happen in normal life. 20% protein, that's what everyone eats. Like keto people get 50% protein, all right? So Americans eat between 20 and 30% protein. And this is the results that he found. So then they got the same groups of rats and they'd switch them back and forth. And you get the 20% rats, the rats on 20% casein, and drop them down to a 5% casein diet. And the tumors would just turn off. And then he would get the 5% rats and switch them onto the 20%, and the cancer would just bloom. And so this was a pretty shocking finding, given that this is the range of protein that humans consume, okay? And so, yeah, that's what, so Colin Campbell went on to classify casein as a chemical carcinogen, just like asbestos and cigarettes, okay? And promoted all stages of the cancer process. And we find that there is a really strong correlation between protein intake and cancer incidence. And what he said was that anything above 10% protein promoted disease, 10% animal protein, okay? This is a correlation between milk consumption and prostate cancer. The more milk that you drink, the higher the chance of prostate cancer. There's a stronger correlation between milk and prostate cancer than there is between smoking and lung cancer. Okay? And so this is really, really cool, I think, here. So he broke down all the stages of cancer formation. You know, like we have a lot of anxiety in society at large because we see so much cancer. Like 1 in 8 women will have breast cancer. 48% of men, like 1 in 2 men will have cancer. You will be sitting in an oncologist's office. 1 in 3 women will have cancer in their lifetime, okay? So we're rightfully kind of freaked out about like chemicals and produce and, you know, pesticides and what have you, right? So, and this is what I learned in the class. It's just fascinating. So there's 3 stages of cancer progression, I guess. The first one is initiation, and this is when the carcinogen goes into our body, okay? And it's true, most carcinogens come from like industrial or agricultural processes, okay? So yeah, it's, you know, like that, whatever, Roundup in the field, you know, any random thing. But our bodies, our immune system, have a way of every time a carcinogen comes in, your body will detect it and it just shoots it right back out, okay? So your body will neutralize about 99.9% of carcinogens, okay? However, if one carcinogen gets through, what it'll do is it'll attach onto a cell and then genetically mutate that cell, okay? If it attaches onto a cell and then the cell divides before it can be zapped by your immune system and that daughter cell makes it through, that's how you get a carcinogen through into your body, okay? It takes about 3 minutes to be turned into a cancer cell, all right? So then after you get one bad cell that goes through, and usually, I read somewhere that it's about, you get about 1 cancer cell a day that makes it through, okay? Then it goes on to the promotion stage. And in the promotion stage, that's where it goes from 1 cell to 2 cells. And everything varies on the tumor doubling time. It may take 200 days to double, okay? And then you got 2 cells. 200 days later, you got 4 cells, and so on, okay? And the doubling time varies. But this is the promotion stage where these carcinogenic cells are just looking around for a place to settle on into, okay? And the question is, are you gonna grow really fast or are you not gonna grow really fast? After the promotion phase is the progression phase. And progression is where the cancer is basically visible to the human eye. Okay, we can see it as a tumor. You might be that first spot on a CAT scan, and then it gets bigger and bigger, and then it spreads to other parts of the body, and that's called metastasizing, okay? So what Dr. Campbell found is that the diet really affects the promotion phase of cancer, okay? And so here I'm going to talk to you about, we're going to talk about protein, because there's difference between what kind of protein you get in cancer promotion, okay? So y'all have heard the term complete protein, right? And all animal protein is a complete protein, okay? So what makes proteins complete or incomplete? Our bodies, there's 20 different amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. It's like a pearl necklace with a bunch of amino acids on it, okay? 11 amino acids our body makes on its own, no problem, okay? But there's 9 amino acids that we have to get from food, okay? And these are called the essential amino acids because they have to come from our diet, all right? And so all animal protein contains all 9 of these essential amino acids, and that's why it's called a complete protein, okay? Got everything you need. Different plants contain these 9 essential amino acids, but in different concentrations, and usually they'll be really low in one, like almost non-existent, like lysine or methionine will be really low, okay? But they don't deliver all the amino acids in one big clump, in one big package, okay? And so the big nutrition question we have is it good to get our protein in the complete form with all 9 essential amino acids all at once dumped into your stomach, okay? So Dr. Campbell did, and this study that he did on the rats and the proteins, he did it like 50 different ways. It was a very strong study. So we had one group of rats that got high carcinogens, a high carcinogen load over on the left there, and like those little red dots are the carcinogens, okay? Of course, the rats that got the high carcinogens had more like mutagenesis, more mutated cells, more clusters, more tumors. That stands to reason. More carcinogens, more tumors. Okay, and this is like, he's giving them all the same dye, so the only variable is the carcinogen. Then he does a low carcinogen group. They have less tumors. Okay, that makes sense. Now, we've got that same mechanism going on, but now we're going to change the diet around, okay? So look over on the high carcinogen group. Like, and they used aflatoxin, which is this mold found on peanuts, and that would cause cancer in rats, okay? So they gave them a lot of aflatoxin, a lot of carcinogen. But then they switched the rats' diet to a low protein diet, okay? And these tumors, instead of progressing, went down to hardly any tumors on a low protein diet. Then they got the rats that didn't hardly have any carcinogens, and they gave them an excess diet, means an excess of protein. They gave them a high protein diet, and they went on to have a whole lot of tumors, okay? And so this is based, this gives us a mechanistic explanation of cancer progression. So what Dr. Campbell determined there is that anything greater than 10% animal protein will promote disease, okay? Now, he did this in a bunch of different ways too, and on this excess protein diet, he would give the rats, I can't remember if this was the same 20%, but he would give them a lot of plant protein, like a high amount of plant protein instead of a high amount of animal protein. Did not promote cancer, okay? And people are always like wringing their hands as far as like how much, you can come on in and sit down if you want. I think there's a chair in the back. Okay, but anyway, don't talk. Times the risk of death from diabetes and 5 times the risk of death from cancer as those consuming less protein. Okay, and like here you can see why, right? Because of all these disease processes. So yeah, don't I need complete protein? We talked about that. And this is another thing, like I kind of, after Paul got his pre-diabetes diagnosis, and then I started like kind of obsessively reading and like listening to all these doctors about a plant-based diet. And I came across Dr. Joel Furman, who talks about how meat and dairy, which is a complete protein, like when you have complete protein dumped into your stomach, in addition to like that cancer research, complete protein stimulates the production of this thing called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, okay? And IGF-1 creates conditions that are favorable to tumor growth, okay? So remember that progression slide, like the cancer cell gets away and it's like, where am I gonna live? Is this a hospitable environment? If you're eating a lot of complete protein, your body is going to secrete excess amounts of IGF-1. And insulin-like growth factor 1 makes things want to grow, okay? And what it'll do is this process called angiogenesis. Angio means vessel, genesis means create. Your body will start to create new blood vessels. It'll be in the mood to create a lot of new blood vessels. So you get a few little tumors that seed, and your body's like, let me help you out. Let me make a bunch of blood vessels here so we can help you grow, okay? And lower amounts of complete protein suppress IGF-1. So after we are done growing, we don't want high levels of IGF-1. So also we get higher levels of estrogen with complete protein, okay? Fat secretes estrogen, so if we're overweight, we have excess estrogen. Estrogen is great when you are childbearing, but excess levels of estrogen after childbearing age tend to promote cancer. That's not there anymore. He had some on his legs. And then, like, how many did you think you had at first?
18 in my abdomen.
18, and now there's like 2 that he can feel. They just went away, you know? And his doctor was like, I don't know what you do with these. I mean, like, no one else had any cure for that. But you go on a plant-based diet, that's what I figured. Like, the blood supply started retracting for all these tumors because incomplete protein doesn't promote that, okay? So here's my favorite slide. How do I get, so this is for the keto folks, okay? How will I get enough protein with plants? So we're looking at 100 calories of steak and 100 calories of broccoli. 100 calories of steak is like 4 slices, and this is 3 cups of broccoli, okay? So, of course, you know, it's a trick question. So which one do you think has the most protein between the steak and the broccoli, okay? So the steak is 6.4 grams of protein for 100 calories, okay? The broccoli has 11.1 grams of protein per 100 calories. It's a little bit harder to eat 100 calories of broccoli than it is 100 calories of steak. But yeah, so there's lots of protein. You get all the protein you need in plants. And this goes to show you, like, if you eat steak, 100 calories of steak, you're like, well, I don't eat any broccoli now. But if you're not eating meat, you have to eat a lot of plants. Okay, so when you're on a plant-based diet, you eat huge amounts. Okay, like there's these plant-based, wonderful and sublime. So that's where cows get their protein from. The steak gets its protein from eating grass. Okay, all animals get their protein from the plants. Okay, they're just the middleman. So we say just cut out the middleman, you can get your protein from the source. Because the protein in meat and dairy comes with a lot of baggage. Okay, TMAO, saturated fat, lots of other nasty stuff that you don't even want to know about. So, okay, so now we're going to compare the amount of a bunch of different stuff between broccoli and steak. And so look at the protein. We already talked about that. Twice as much protein. Calcium. Where are you going to get your calcium on a plant-based diet? Well, broccoli's got 322 milligrams compared to 2 milligrams of calcium with steak. Okay. Iron, 3.5 milligrams in broccoli compared to 0.7 milligrams in steak. Okay, like 4 times as much iron in broccoli. All right, so you can get all the iron you need, and it's not heme iron, which is not good for you. That's found in meat. Fiber, 4.7 grams. There's no fiber in any animal protein. Okay. Let's see, and then phytochemicals and antioxidants, our body requires these. There's none of those found in animal protein. Folate, B12, you can see a lot, or B2 there, okay. Cholesterol is the only thing that the steak has, the plants don't have, okay? We don't need any dietary cholesterol, to be clear. Our bodies make all the cholesterol we need, and in reality, most of us have way too many than a standard American diet. If you're just eating fried, texturized vegetable protein and beer and vegan donuts, like you're not getting hardly any nutrients, okay? Yeah, so Dr. Joel Fuhrman came up with this equation that your healthy life expectancy, like how long you're gonna live and still be able to walk, is a formula with micronutrients divided by calories. So you want your micronutrients to be really high, and you want the amount of calories you need to be really low, okay? And so this is really cool, the nutritional density scale. So remember the kale craze, like, I don't know, like 15 years ago? That happened after Joel Fuhrman came out with this nutritional density scale, and at the very top was kale at 100. And then Whole Foods used that, like they put the ANDI, or aggregate nutrient density scale, on all their produce, and like kale was at 100, so then it starts flying off the shelves. But anyway, so this is the nutritional density of vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, and antioxidants, the aggregate, okay? So raw leafy green vegetables are at the top as far as nutritional density. This is what we want the most of, okay? And then you can see, like, by the time you drop down to like non-greens, non-starchy vegetables like squash, it's about half of that. These legumes are half. And then we drop down, you know, nuts and seeds are down to a 20. Like now we're rapidly dropping off. And this doesn't mean like everything you eat should be kale. Like we get a variety, but just to understand the nutritional density. Dairy, meat, eggs, we're down to like 10% of the scale. Kale, oats, they grind it all up and then assess the nutrient value. The animal foods is milk, chicken, beef, salmon, and egg. And then the refined plants, that's like your vegan junk food, basically. Potato chips, spaghetti, cola, donuts, and Italian dressing, okay? So look at the protein. You know, the whole plants have about 2/3 as much protein as animal foods per 100 calories, okay? Lipids, fat, plants hardly have any. Animal foods have a whole lot. Oh, and the refined vegan junk food has a whole lot too. Fiber, tons of fiber in the whole plants. No, 0 fiber in animal. 1.8 grams in the junk food. Okay, so no fiber in the junk food, even though it's vegan. Lots of potassium in plants, that's cancer protective. Lots of iron in the plants, compared to the animal foods. Look at that. And calcium, twice as much calcium in the plants as there is in the animal foods per 100 calories. So if you ever go to a doctor and they're like, well, where are you going to get your protein and your calcium? Just, there you go. It's all in writing. USDA.
The vitamin B12, I thought B12 was good for us, and it looks like it only comes
So-
from animal foods.
Right. B12 is found in dirt in the soil. And the only way we really get it is from, like, animals ingest it, and then it is in their intestines, which ends up a little bit in your meat. And that's how we get the majority of our B12. And you only need a tiny bit of B12. So most vegans do have to supplement B12. And you can take 1,000 micrograms once a week. It is water soluble, so you don't have to worry about getting too much. I mean, in my experience, like, we're hungry anymore. And like, it's crazy, you know, I've worked cardiology for a year, back in the late 90s, 97, I remember, is when FinFin came out, that Fedra, okay? And so we have all these patients, it's nuking their heart valves. They're having to have a mitral valve replacement because it's destroyed their heart, okay? And this is all for an appetite suppressant. And I remember thinking, like, well, you could like sell hummus and be like, it's $100 a can, but it'll suppress your appetite. And it's your food too. People would be like, yes, I will buy that. But I mean, like, it's $1. And so, like, this is the easiest thing in the world. I am never hungry. I mean, like, I may get a little bit hungry, but I never just fall off the cliff to where I'm just ravenous. And so, and this shows, like, 400 calories of oil just barely touches the bottom of your stomach. That's the most caloric dense thing you have. 400 calories of beef doesn't fill you up very much. It's terrible for you, but you're still gonna be hungry, okay? But 400 calories of vegetables, you are stuffed, okay? And then you eat all this fiber and it just sticks in your gut, and you don't ever fall off to that absolute desperation hungry thing anymore where you'll just eat whatever. So that's what I found, is like, I have a lot more willpower. I mean, like I'm sure Kathy, I always point Kathy out as a 20-year vegan, but like, people that have been vegan for like decades, like, they're like, oh, cheese is disgusting, you know. I'm not at that point yet, but I am not, like, I have the willpower to not eat cheese because I'm not usually ever hungry. So, I mean, like, once you kind of break your addiction to this stuff, like, I'm not revolted by it, but I don't feel compelled to eat it. So it's just easy for me to just be like, well, I feel sick if I ate it, you know, and so I just eat something else. So anyway, yes, stages of plant-based motivation. So if you're thinking now, like, I wonder if I could do this. So first of all, we got logic and reason. We know we don't need animal protein to be healthy, okay? And in fact, animal protein is not good for us in many ways, okay? And if we realize we can get enough protein from plants, and in fact, it's better for us to get that kind of protein instead of complete protein, then we've got like the logic part down. But I've been a nurse for 27 years, and my job used to depend on getting people to eat things they don't want to eat. And I know people don't just like intellectually read a book and realize something's bad for them and then do it, okay?